Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Shout out to our sponsor, Chessable. Their courses are great. There's a link in the show notes for their main page, as well as our landing page, which has a list of some of my favorite courses. So I'm going to jump right into the content this week. We're going to be talking about using a chess engine, and specifically for club players. Now, most listeners of this podcast and chess content in general, whether it's podcasts or YouTube videos, most consumers of that generally, and this is based on anecdotal evidence, are somewhere in the beginner unrated phase up to about 1,500 or so. That's, again, based on anecdotal evidence, based on comments that I've received. That's generally the audience. And the truth is, that's what most players are rated anyway. Most players are in that range. If you look at online ratings and even the U.S. Chess Federation ratings, most amateurs are not really in the 1,600 to say 2,000 range or so. Those are kind of the minority. So most of you listening are probably, again, beginner up to about 1,500 approximately. And that's really who this is aimed towards, this episode. But I think players of all levels will sort of get something from this. I think higher rated players will enjoy the discussion. And that's really what I'm focusing on. So if a bunch of grandmasters are sitting around talking, discussing how they use a chess engine, that's a very different world from what we go through, okay, and our experiences. So as amateur players, I think using a chess engine takes on a different meaning. I think there are some misconceptions, and I'm just sharing my thoughts. I'm not really telling, I'm sharing. The idea for this episode actually came from somebody from the club who's, I think, like a 1,500 player. He should probably be higher. I think he's underrated. But he said, why don't you do an episode about, how to use a chess engine, because I'm a little confused about it myself. I'm not sure. So I thought some people would benefit from this. I definitely have some thoughts and some opinions, and that's kind of the direction I'm going to go in. So let's jump right in. So first of all, and I've said this before, the most important improvement method is to analyze your games either with an engine or a coach if you have one. You need to analyze your games. It's just so important because you're going to identify patterns where you keep making the same mistakes, and you can come back to your games over and over and review that. But you really need to do a deep dive into your own games. That's very, very important. Now, if you have a coach, that's great. Many people don't because they can be expensive, or people don't have time, or they just haven't clicked with the right coach. But if you don't have a coach, using an engine, I don't want to say it's the next best thing, but it kind of is, and it'll help you identify some mistakes. Now, I prefer Fritz. That's my engine of choice. I've been using it for years. I'm just used to it. I'm not saying it's the best one, but it is quite good. I do enjoy it. But most of the engines available now, they're all good. There's Stockfish, which I think, don't quote me on this, I think that's the engine that chess.com uses when you analyze your games. I'm not 100% about that. But there are other engines out there, and they're rated around like 3,000 now. I mean, it's crazy how strong they are. You could have something on your smartphone that is stronger than the best players in the world. It's crazy. A lot different from like the late 90s when these big chess computers like Deep Blue were coming out. The computers now are nearly flawless. It's pretty remarkable. So you have, at your fingertips for a very low cost, a chess computer that can, analyze your game to your heart's content and identify all your mistakes, all that good stuff. So I prefer Fritz. I'm not saying that's the best one. That's just the one I'm used to. And that'll be sort of the basis for the examples that I use in this episode. Now, a couple of things, and we're getting into a little bit of psychology and things like that here. You have to look at your losses no matter how painful they are. And I know that's rough because you might have had a painful or embarrassing loss. I've been there, and you just want to throw it out. I mean, even title players do this from what I've heard. You just want to delete the game or just throw it out, get rid of your score sheet. You don't want to look at it. I know where I went wrong, that whole thing. You have to get out of that habit. You have to swallow your ego, and you have to look at your losses because that's where you're really going to learn. And I know it's painful because you're putting in this embarrassing loss in the computer, and it's a reminder of the mistakes you made, and you just kind of want to forget about it. But you need to look at your losses, and you have to be very careful of the saying, well, I know where I went wrong. I don't need to look at the game. Jeremy Silman talks about this a lot. I am Jeremy Silman, who you know is like one of my heroes as far as chess education. He was saying in one of his books that he gets that from students all the time. We don't need to look at the game. I know where I went wrong. And then when they look at the game, he's finding himself being okay with moves that the student criticized. Like the student will say, I don't know why I played, knight F3 here. And Jeremy Silman's like, well, that's actually a decent move. And then moves that they thought were good were not good. So we're very biased towards our own games. So moves that you think were poor may actually be okay, and moves that you thought were good may be blunders or mistakes. So you have to be very careful of that I know where I went wrong mentality, because there could also be a lot of other things you missed, and you can always learn something from the game, because that's often what happens. We get obsessed with that one mistake or that one blunder, but there's a lot of other learning opportunities available by reviewing your games. So looking at Fritz now on my computer, when you have the engine running, it'll show the different lines. You all know what I'm talking about. I usually have about 4 lines going at once. Now it depends. You could have more. I like 4 because I think less than 4 really isn't enough. But if I have more than 4, it's a little overwhelming, but that's up to you. If you want 5 or 6 lines, I usually keep 4 going. And I want to talk about the symbols that are common with most chess engines, even though I use Fritz, these are kind of universal. And I think they're on chess.com as well. So when you look at a line, if the position's equal, obviously you'll see that equal sign and there'll be a numerical value. Now, don't get too caught up in the numerical value, especially like the 0.1% or whatever. Like if it says equal 0.20 or 0.18, the numbers are kind of negligible. It's almost overkill for our level. I look more at the main symbol, like whether it says equals or plus minus, something like that. But just some thoughts there. If you see equal, obviously the computer is saying it's theoretically equal. But if white is quote unquote slightly better, it'll say plus over equals, like a fraction on top, plus over equals, meaning white is slightly better. Or you'll see equals over plus, meaning black is slightly better. But the truth is, at the amateur level, plus over equals and equals over plus, that's the same as equals, right? At the amateur level, the whole like white is slightly better or black is slightly better, like on the computer, that means equal, all right, as far as 2 humans and 2 amateurs playing. So don't look at your position. Let's say you were white. Don't think, oh, it says plus over equals, I was winning or I was so much better. It's a negligible theoretical difference. And remember, the computer is showing you these lines based on the perfect response or the best response from both sides. And we all know amateur games don't work that way. And when I say amateur games, I'm talking about unrated all the way up to 2000 or even 2100. Some would argue even 2200, but definitely when you're getting like below 2000, below 1800, those types of games are filled with mistakes. And by mistakes, I don't necessarily mean gross blunders where you're hanging pieces or you're missing obvious tactics. There are also a lot of subtle mistakes, positional mistakes, playing on the wrong side of the board, that type of thing. So plus over equals, equals over plus, that like slightly better notation, that's the same as equals as far as 2 humans. So don't get too caught up with that, all right, because you're dealing with 2 imperfect humans. The next step up is where one side is clearly better. That's where you'll see plus over minus or minus over plus. So plus over minus means that white is clearly better, and then minus over plus is that black is clearly better. But again, at this level, you have to bring these down a notch because we're dealing with two imperfect amateurs. But the plus over minus and minus over plus is a little more accurate, like you probably are a little bit better. But again, that doesn't mean it's decisive and that the game is going to win itself. And then the other notation is where it says plus minus, where it's next to each other, like a plus followed by a minus sign, and then minus followed by a plus sign, reading from left to right. So in this case, it's a little more true to life. So if it says plus minus, that means that white is winning. Not necessarily that it's a resignable position, but that white is winning, plus minus, and then minus plus means black is clearly winning. Now, whether it's a resignable position really depends on the number. If it says white's winning and it's like 4.0, well, that's different than, maybe 1.75 or something, or if it's like, plus over minus or something like that. But when you see them next to each other, the plus minus or the minus plus, one side is clearly winning. All right. And obviously you want to be on the better side of that. But the point is, with these symbols in the chess engine, don't be too literal, because again, amateur games are very, very imperfect. And I'm sure you've put your games in an engine. Those of you who have some experience with engines, I'm sure you've put your game in the engine. Let's say you had the black pieces where it says for most of the game, white might have been quote unquote slightly better. Maybe at one point white was clearly better, like plus over minus, but then you end up winning the game. All right. Because at the amateur level, so many things can happen. So don't be too literal with this, which, by the way, a future episode might be next week, is all going to be about the dangers of being too literal at the chessboard. That's coming up. I won't get into detail with that now, but that should be a fun episode as far as like the thought process and the psychology. That's the deal with the symbols. Now, being a pawn down, just some other thoughts here. Being a pawn down is not always decisive at the amateur level. I mean, if two GMs are going at it and one player is up a pawn and the other player doesn't have any compensation, that can often be decisive. But if you're a pawn down and you see that in the engine and it says that, white is clearly better or black is clearly better, or even if black or white is winning, that's not necessarily decisive being up a pawn, especially if the queens are still on the board, because so many things can happen. But again, we are discussing, using the engine, of course, after the game is over. So if you see that early in the game when you're analyzing, don't think, well, I should have won or I should have lost. Because remember, it's giving it to you based on the position, and it's assuming, perfect play from both sides. All right. So always remember that. It's like the best theoretical response, but humans don't play that way. So now, how exactly should you use the engine? How much time do you spend? Okay, so fine, your game is in the engine now. You've inputted all the moves. Or if, like me, if you used an electronic scorekeeper, you clicked on the file, it's all there. Okay, so you have this game. So what do you do? Where do you start? There's more than one correct answer for this. So this is just a suggestion. I'm not saying this is the only way, but I found that this has worked for me. What you want to do first, review the game as a whole. Right, just kind of get the big picture. You want to look at major tactical or positional mistakes. You want to look at key moments, okay? Just kind of go through it as a whole. And then you want to go down rabbit holes. You do want to go down rabbit holes, okay? That's important when you analyze. You really want to unpack it and really do a deep dive into your game. So say, okay, well, in this position, I was thinking of doing this. What if I had done that? Or I think he had, bishop f7 here, but he didn't play it. What if he did play it? You should definitely do that. Spend a lot of time doing that. Like, I think he was going to do this, but that might have been a blunder. And then you might look at it and say, oh, it wasn't a blunder. That actually would have been good for him to do that. And see what you missed, see what ideas you missed for your opponent, for yourself. But go down those rabbit holes, look at many, many different lines, and really understand what's happening. Because a big way that you learn is, for example, okay, I didn't play knight a3 because I was convinced it was a mistake. I spent like 12 minutes analyzing it. You then need to look at knight a3 in the computer. And if it was a good move, you need to really think about why you didn't play it. That type of thing, those types of thought experiments. So go down rabbit holes, and then you need to spend the most time on critical positions, or what I call inflection points. These are the points in the game where you either played a very, very good move, but more often than not, where you blundered and where you make a mistake. And usually it's those same type of positions where your mistakes happen over and over, those types of inflection points. So you need to clean those up in order to improve. So if there's a critical position, like you had a lot of trouble during the game, and then it turns out you played a bad move, you need to really think about why you did that. And one thing that I do, this may seem over the top, but if there was a position, I should say, where I had a lot of trouble during the game and I ended up, making a mistake, I try to fix it for next time. Like what was going on in my head? Like, why didn't I see this? And I'll actually set up my actual tournament board, the position, and try to emulate actually being in tournament conditions. Like, okay, what was I thinking? What was giving me the problem? Why didn't I see it? And I'll do that many times. And that has to do not just with pattern recognition, but also the psychology of it. Was I feeling nervous? Was I tired? Was I focused on one particular move that he had that I didn't see the big picture? Whatever it might be. But the critical positions or those inflection points where you keep making those mistakes over and over, those types of patterns and those types of bad habits, you need to really identify those and fix them for next time. Because after all, that's the point of analyzing your game, right? You want to become slightly stronger each time you do it. And you need to analyze your wins also, because it's very easy. I talked before about how it's easy to throw away your losses and forget about them. But we sometimes do that with our wins. Like, okay, maybe you won a piece early on. Okay, I don't need to look at the game. But you know what? There might have been something down the road where even though you were up a piece, you missed something because you got cavalier. He actually could have equalized. So don't be so quick to dismiss your wins as well. All right. Because, the common thinking is, well, you learn more from your losses. I agree with that, but you'd be surprised. You can also learn from your wins as well. So even if you felt it was a quote unquote easy win, you should still look at it, because there still may be ideas that were there. Because a lot of times if we're up material, we sometimes play worse, believe it or not, because we kind of let our guard down and we think the game is going to win itself. But again, the most important point I can make is, for your mistakes, you have to understand it theoretically, what you did wrong and what the correct idea is using the engine. But then you have to think about why you played that move. Did you not analyze enough? Were you, distracted? Were you, looking at something that, was there another side of it that you didn't see? For example, a common mistake is that you'll be focused. Okay, well, the knight can go, let's say you have a knight on C6. Okay, well, the knight can go to E5 rather. But you completely missed that it can also go to B4, or that it can go to A7. And you were so focused on that you missed, okay, well, it can also do this, like these sort of multiple ideas. So really spend some time on that. Look at all these possibilities, go down rabbit holes, and, spend some time. In other words, reviewing a game on an engine doesn't mean like spending 5 minutes and that's it. Like, oh, okay, I made this mistake. Okay, this was a blunder. I lost a pawn. Okay, I'm done. I don't have to look at it anymore. It's kind of like the way some people look at chess puzzles. They kind of rush through it. They get the correct answer, or they guess it, and then, okay, next puzzle. And then they quickly, okay, next puzzle. The proper way to do a chess puzzle, especially if it's one that was tricky, you should really go through it in your head like 5 or 6 times. And then what happens is that sort of, method or practice of reviewing your games this way and going over it several times, it helps with tactics and analysis overall. So what happens is, almost like a computer, you develop these patterns, and as you play your games, and this will come with experience, your opponent will make a move that's a mistake, and then it's like a light goes on, like ding, it's like, okay, wait a minute, that's a mistake. There's something there. Go find it. That type of thing. Now that comes from practice and experience, but you'll see it where you'll know there's some type of tactical move or something. You just can't see it right away, but you can just tell that something's there. That comes from analyzing your game in this way and from going over, tactics and puzzles. All right. But a chess engine can really help with that. Now let's take a step back and talk about exactly what a chess engine can and cannot do. All right, so let's kind of get the big picture first. All right, so let's step away from the actual chessboard for a minute. So here's the deal. It's pretty much chess engines, that is, they are pretty much 100% accurate for tactics and mates, etc. So in other words, if you or your opponent had a tactical shot, could have won a piece, could have won a pawn, had a major positional threat that's completely winning, or obviously if there were a way to checkmate, if there were a mating net or like a mate in 5, something like that, the computer is going to catch it. I mean, it's pretty much error-proof in that regard. All right. So again, tactics, mating patterns, anything like that, winning a piece, the computer will definitely catch it. So that's good. So you can check all that stuff. Contrary to popular belief, computers, the engines can give some positional insight. I know some people believe that, well, it doesn't really help with the thinking process and with positional ideas. Yes and no, because a lot of times, let's say for example, let me give a practical example. Let's say you're piling on an isolated pawn type thing, right? It'll show like arrows on the board of all your pieces attacking it. Like it'll say, okay, the focus is all on E4. So there is some positional insight from the engines, especially when you run a full analysis. Like in Fritz, if you click on full analysis, it'll run for whatever, 10, 15 minutes you can set it, and it'll actually analyze the game, including like written prose, like, white is an advantage here, all the action is on the A file, whatever it might be. So that's kind of cool, but it does give you some positional insight as well. I mean, it definitely gives you tactical ideas and mating ideas, but you can use it for positional ideas, but it is mostly technical, right? That is sort of a drawback of the chess engines. It's mostly technical, right? It obviously is not going to get into your psychology and your thought process. It's not going to say, oh, you were obviously nervous here, or, you didn't see, this other move. I mean, maybe you can do that a little bit, but it's generally mostly technical. And you can do this on your own, though. As far as the thought process, what you have to do is you kind of have to step away from the engine while you use it. So it'll show you that you played this move that was incorrect, but then you need to step away from that and say, okay, why did I play that move? Like, what was going on in my mind that caused me to play that? And that was the exercise I was talking about before, about actually setting up your chessboard and pretending you're in tournament conditions and kind of replaying what your thought process was, so that hopefully if that happens again, you won't make the same mistake. Just a little psychological trick, because as with any activity, whether it's a sport or something like chess, whatever it is, you want to try to simulate actual tournament conditions or performance conditions as best you can so that you don't make those mistakes again. And then the last thing I would recommend is you should create a database of all your games, your tournament games, as well as your opening repertoire. So what I do, all my over-the-board tournament games, like from the club, I have in a file, and I can review them sporadically, especially the games with those inflection points I was talking about, where maybe I made a mistake or I missed something. I'll replay those. And again, my thought process is, okay, why did I do that at the club? Like, what was I thinking? I really try to get into that so that I can remember for the next time. But you should definitely create a database of your games. I do mine, of course, in Fritz. I told you that, but ChessBase has an online database as well for your games. So if I'm anywhere, if I'm out of the house and I'm on my laptop, if I have some time, I can look at it there as well. So that's a big productivity thing. And you also want to create a database of your openings. I would create one file for each of your openings, like just some main lines you play. For example, I have several files for different London system variations. I have one for the French defense variations. I have one for the Queen's Indian and Nimzo Indian, which I play, and I'll talk about at some point in a future episode, things like that. And then you can refer to it just to kind of, refresh your memories, a refresher, you can brush up on it. So I like to have my own opening database files in addition to any, courses I might do, whatever on Chessable or chess.com, whatever it is. So engines are not only for analyzing your games, but they're also for, again, creating these databases. Fritz is a very powerful tool, but there are other ones as well that are just as powerful, like Stockfish. There's probably a few others that I'm not familiar with. I'm so used to Fritz that I really haven't looked into any of the other ones. It really serves my purpose. So these are some thoughts about using a chess engine. I hope this was helpful. I know some people were asking about it, but this is how I use a chess engine. So it's not just for analysis of your games. You can use it for databases as well, which I recommend. But you definitely want to spend a lot of time unpacking your game. You don't just want to go over it in 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, well, I made this mistake on move 5, so that's it, I'm done. I don't need to look at it. And again, for those losses that you have, especially those painful losses, you do need to put those in the computer and look at them, because that's how you're going to grow. And your wins as well. Even if it seems like it was an easy win, trust me, there's something that you can pick up from it. So I hope this helped. Really appreciate you listening, appreciate the support. All of our links are in the show notes. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day.